Hey, what is going on? John Ellison here on day 3 of my 30-day book challenge as I explore the Symbiocene, Visions of a New Earth. I've been reading widely and wanted to take a little bit of time to synthesize some of the core ideas that I've uncovered as I dig into this vision of a symbiotic future where people and the planet can finally discover how to live together in harmony as one living system. The first piece I dove into was by James Bridle, a book called Ways of Being, recommended to me by my friend Gregory Landaway of Region Network. This opens with a pretty compelling case arguing that artificial intelligence is going to centralize capital, power, and influence in the hands of a small number of corporations, and that effectively will conclude the end of our current capitalist experiment. It will also force us to really reconsider what it means to be intelligent. And along the way, we might actually discover that all of life is intelligent. It's just that intelligence is different than we understood it. We have somehow taken the notion of humanness and planted that on all of our living beings, and thinking that because they don't have human-like qualities, that they aren't actually intelligent. I began to wonder about a legal system that begins to recognize all of life as agents in this vast dance of what it means to be alive. And that as we rediscover what it means to be human in the age of AI, we begin to recognize that we are not actually separate individuals. We are a web of relations that require interdependency from a wide number of different species in order to survive. Our very gut microbiome being a living testimony of the symbiotic ecosystem that we need for our own human health. The next piece was written by a gentleman named Amitav Ghosh off the back of the pandemic called The Nutmegs Curse. This begins with a compelling provocation about the story of a single spice and the Dutch colonial conquest, which destroyed an entire island worth of people in order to capture and retain this specific spice for the purposes of trade. It began to really exfoliate some of the core cavities of the Western colonial mind, and also the privileges that we have been so incredibly blind to realize in our life, and completely neglect the consequences not only on first peoples all around the world, but also upon this vast web of life that's so delicately balanced, and that we are actively counterbalancing through our centralized colonial efforts to assume power and control within a very narrow remit of what actually matters in the form of an abstract exchange of value, namely money. This really started to hit me, specifically this idea of the colonial conquest renaming things, that it being New York and New Thames, New Mexico, and there being actually a complete genocide of indigenous heritage as the Western mind has supplanted itself on other cultures. And it made me think, hey, well, maybe it's not actually visions of a new earth. Maybe it's just visions of the earth as it was always ultimately going to be as life figured itself out, in this case through us, human form as species. The next piece was an anthology of indigenous science fiction collected by a woman named Grace Dillon in a book called Walking the Clouds. This really began to highlight to me this notion of identity and how indigenous thinking really does recognize the role of ancestry, of multi-generational lineage in who we are, the stories we tell ourselves, and what we value. It also began to correlate the role of land, specific geographical features, rivers, forests, mountains, that create a deep recess and precedent of a unique expression of what it means to be human. It also began to rattle and shake some of the conceptions of time, this very linear, consequential, analytical way of thinking that has been the container for the Western mind actually can be very actively deconstructed and provide us with a very different way of approaching not only the challenges that we face, but also the horizons through which we attempt to create solutions. This multi-generational view, passing down oral traditions, and really instilling values through storytelling was a deep and compelling piece of a symbiotic puzzle to me. This next work really took quite a bit of time to get through, but I was so glad that I invested significant effort into reading this thoroughly. This one is Children of a Modest Star, published by Jonathan Blake and Niels Gilman, which argues that we need institutional innovation in order to address the planetary crises that we face. It stipulates that the nation-state itself is structurally incapable of addressing climate change, biodiversity collapse, global pandemics, other planetary boundaries that are being crossed, and argues that we need a movement of power largely in two directions. That nation-states need to relinquish power at a planetary level for new planetary bodies that are designated to address specific challenges that have a very narrow scope and are responsible for cultivating what they call planetary sapience, which is in essence a form of collective consciousness as the wide streams of data about planetary health begin to cultivate through all of the remote sensors, all of the computers, all of the algorithms, the machine learning models that are beginning to make sense of our atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide or the biodiversity of a given forest, and that this actually is a very important trend and phenomena which has never existed before and is a key component of us overcoming these planetary crises. It also argues that the nation-state needs to relinquish control at a local level and to make a concerted effort to empower local communities, local bodies, municipalities to decide how to act and fulfill these targets about these planetary goals, given the knowledge and information that has been distributed through these large-scale planetary intelligence sources. It was a very compelling provocation. I am not a political scientist. I have spent my entire life as an entrepreneur, but to begin to think about governance innovation in the age of regeneration that transition us from this hegemonic nation-state rule, which is basically proven it cannot address these challenges, to a future where we have completely different types of governing bodies that determine our use of resources towards specific planetary goals. It was completely fascinating, totally mind-opening. And I think what I'm starting to grapple with here as a synthesis is that artificial intelligence is going to be a pivotal disruptive spear that opens up a significant amount of cultural, political, social innovation. And this is actually an enormous opportunity for us to not only rethink our existing systems, but also to begin to institute a new story about what it means to be human, both at an individual and a collective level. And that this story can be rooted on a completely different set of values. And to really speak of a planetary identity as one living organism is actually a very important part of the transition that we make today. We hold identity constructs that have been passed down to us by our ancestors, and they actually aren't helping us. In fact, many of these constructs are creating the challenges that we face today. So we need to be like designers to reconstruct these systems of self, the systems of value, and begin to be very bold and radical in our design of new innovative systems that can care for 8 billion people on the planet amidst large-scale, complex planetary crises. So this was an absolute fire hose for me and my brain. I just downloaded it to you after nearly 2 days of full-time reading in 9 minutes, and I will continue to chronicle these insights throughout the next 30 days, and I begin to synthesize more and more in writing in the form of a book. You can purchase the pre-sale of this digital version of Symbiocene using the Stripe link below. And if anything resonates with you, or if you think there's any other authors or materials that I should be looking at, please do let me know. I'm hoping that this can be a co-creative, imagining process of a symbiotic future that sparks inspiration for generations to come. And I hope you enjoy the ride. Thanks for tuning in. I'm John Ellison. See you on the other side.